Welcome to Series 66.9. As you know, Series 66 is our opportunity to take a little bit of time each and every devotion to go through all 66 books of the Bible. This is 66.9 because we are on the 9th book of the Bible, 1 Samuel. Now, even though this is the 9th book in our Bible, as the scriptures were originally being created and put together in what we know as the Bible today, from 1 Samuel to 2 Kings, that's a total of 4 books, was considered as one collection, one story of the kings of Israel. However, it was placed into 4 books that we know it today because as it was written and passed down, it was written in scrolls, and those scrolls became too large to become one volume. And so they got split up and then into the bound form that we know of today. So in the book of 1 Samuel, we have some amazing and wonderful stories. And I'm going to spend some time today talking about 2 of them. The first story comes in 1 Samuel chapter 3. In chapter 3, we first hear about Samuel as a young boy. In the first 2 chapters, we hear of Samuel's birth and his mother dedicating him to the Lord. And then in chapter 3, Samuel is ministering before the Lord with the priest Eli. There's an interesting line here in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 3 that really intrigues me. It says, "In those days the word of the Lord was rare." It was a time in history where Eli, the priest, was doing his job, was doing his work, was doing the things that he had been taught to do throughout history to keep the synagogue going, to keep the temple running in those days. I can sympathize with Eli. It feels like some days that we're just sort of keeping things going, waiting and hoping and wishing that we would hear from God. But sometimes God certainly surprises us, as he does here in 1 Samuel chapter 3. So, Eli is a boy. He's under the tutelage of Eli. And so Samuel is living in the temple with Eli. And one night, Eli goes to bed, and Samuel goes to his room and goes to bed. And Samuel wakes up hearing his name, Samuel, Samuel. Because he knows that Eli is old and may need his assistance, he runs quickly into Eli's office. And he says, "Here I am, what do you need?" Eli's confused. He said, I didn't call you. Go back and lay down. As Samuel lays down again, this happens a total of 3 times. He hears his name. He gets up. He runs to Eli. On the 3rd time, Eli finally understands what's happening. He says, Samuel, God is speaking to you. The next time you hear it, respond in this way. Here I am, Lord. Your servant is listening. Samuel goes back. He lays down. Indeed, he hears his name again. Samuel, Samuel. This time, instead of running to Eli, he raises up and he says, Lord, here I am. Your servant is listening. I wonder, have you heard from God? If you've heard from God, do you go running to your pastor or to other people and wondering what they need? Or are you listening to God's direction and movement? What God says to Eli, or what God says to Samuel, is really important to us today. When Samuel finally responds, Lord, your servant is listening, God says, Samuel, I am about to do something, and I'm going to use you to help me. Samuel essentially is the last judge, the one who is becoming ruler over Israel, but moving them into a new phase in their history where they no longer have judges, warrior kings, but now they have a king because they've begged and pleaded throughout the book of 1 Samuel. And God uses Samuel to anoint the first king, Saul. Now Saul, as we read throughout the book of 1 Samuel, was not a very good king. He looked out more for himself than for the people, and he led them into very difficult places. And so Saul was a bad king and was not the one that would be the prototypical king of the future. And so Samuel is used to anoint the next king as well. This story is found in 1 Samuel chapter 16. In this particular chapter, we first hear the name of King David. Now, David is only a boy, And Samuel is a little bit upset in this chapter because he has anointed Saul and he wants Saul to succeed, but Saul's not doing so well. And so he's grieving Saul. He's like, no, I know that he has a chance. Lord, you have put Saul over the people of Israel. You helped me to do that, and you alone are doing that. But as God said back in chapter 3, I'm about to do something. Oh, these words are great. I want to believe that. I want to believe that God is about to do something in our midst, not elevate a king or elevate someone to office, but to really move in our lives and in the church and in our community, and to show people what the grace and the love of God looks like and what the kingdom of God here on earth is. And so the beginning of chapter 16, Samuel is down. He's upset because of Saul. And so God says, how long will you grieve him? I have a new plan. I'd like you to go to Jesse's house in Bethlehem. Bethlehem you will recognize as the city of Jesus' birth. In the New Testament, we hear Bethlehem, the city of David. And so Saul gathers his things. He goes to Bethlehem, and he goes to Jesse's house. And Jesse asks him, are you here for good or for harm? And Samuel says, I am here to make sacrifices to the Lord, and I'd like to do that in your house. So Jesse makes room and brings his sons out, and two of his older sons come before Samuel, and he sees them as strong, strapping men, and each of them he proclaims as the one who is going to be the king to himself. He prays about it, and God lifts in his spirit, these are not the ones. Now, in those days, in the Old Testament history, the oldest was the one who first would have the right to property and to ownership and leadership in the home after the patriarch was gone, after the father was dead. But God works in mysterious ways. And the oldest son was not picked. The middle son was not picked. And there seems to be no one left. But then Samuel says to Jesse, do you have any other sons? He says, I have one more. My son David is in the fields watching after over our flocks. And Samuel says, go get him. Bring him here. And as he comes in, he is awestruck by the young man. He's beautiful, strong, talented. And God says, this is the one. Even though he's strong, powerful, and beautiful, he is also young. And God says this, don't look at the things that people look at. The people have always picked the strongest, the best, the biggest. But don't look at them. Don't look on the outside, but look at what I look at. For the Lord does not look on the outside of men, but God looks at the heart. This is another important lesson we learn from the book of Samuel, is that even though we feel weak, we feel unworthy, and we feel like we're not up to the task, God chooses us. God looks at our heart and understands and knows that we are worth it, and that God can do amazing things through us. So here in the book of 1 Samuel, we learn two things. First of all, we learn that God is about to do something, and he's going to use his servants to proclaim that message, to prepare the way. And secondly, that God doesn't look at things the way we do. He doesn't see things as all lost. He sees hope. He sees power, and he sees grace. And he wants us to be the ones who proclaim that to the world. It is my hope and prayer today that you hear from God, that you stand up and say, my servant, your servant is listening, and that you know that God is looking at your heart, forming your heart for his glory and his grace. God bless you. Have a great day.